There comes a moment in every strong person's life when silence begins to feel heavier than noise. When the smile they've worn for years becomes a mask, they forget how to remove it. When being the dependable one no longer feels like a compliment but a quiet sentence, an unspoken agreement that their needs will always come last. People rarely notice the weight carried by the person who never breaks. They don't see the nights when exhaustion hums beneath the ribs, or the way the body learns to move through life on automatic, steady, reliable, predictable. And yet, beneath all that strength lies a truth few ever admit. Even the strongest person aches for someone who will simply say, "You don't have to hold everything anymore." This is the story hidden behind that quiet strength. It rarely begins with a grand moment. More often, it comes quietly, through the subtle pull of small responsibilities, the gentle praise of being so mature, or the warm approval that follows every act of reliability. A child who learns early that calmness earns trust. A teenager who figures out that helping others prevents conflict. An adult who discovers that carrying more than their share makes the world run smoother, even if it costs a small piece of themselves. People seldom notice how gradually it happens. How one simple task becomes another. How a single favor turns into a silent expectation. How the dependable one grows into their role the way a tree grows around a fence, slowly, invisibly, but permanently. And because they're good at it, at holding emotions, solving problems, staying steady, others begin to treat their strength as endless. The dependable person becomes the one others call when they're overwhelmed, the one who listens when no one else has time, the one who absorbs chaos without showing cracks. At first, it feels meaningful. There's comfort in being needed, a kind of soft purpose in knowing their presence brings safety to others. They learn to anticipate needs before they're spoken. They learn to quiet their own discomfort so someone else can breathe easier. They learn to be the balance in every room they enter. But beneath the surface, something else begins to form. A quiet erosion of personal space. A slow dimming of their own wants. A sense that stepping back, even for a moment, might cause everything around them to fall apart. This is how the burden begins. Not as weight dropped from above, but as threads woven into the identity itself. Threads that create a life where self-worth becomes tied to usefulness, where rest feels suspicious, and where saying no feels like a betrayal. Before they know it, they are no longer just helping. They are holding. They are carrying. They are becoming the steady ground everyone walks on, never noticing the cracks forming beneath their own feet. The story of becoming the person everyone depends on often begins long before adulthood. Sometimes it begins in a childhood home where emotions fill the air like weather, unpredictable, shifting, demanding someone to hold things steady. Other times it grows from quieter places, a house where responsibility came early, where the child who cleaned their own mess also learned to clean the messes left behind by others. In many homes, the dependable one starts as the peacekeeper. They learn to read faces before words are spoken. They sense tension forming the way others sense a coming storm. They notice when someone needs comfort, when someone needs space, when someone needs silence, and without being asked, they provide it. This early sensitivity is often seen as maturity. Such a good kid. So understanding, so responsible. Praises that land softly, but shape deeply. Slowly, reliability becomes identity. For some, the pattern forms through necessity. A parent who was overwhelmed. A sibling who needed help. A family system where one person growing up a little too fast made life easier for everyone else. For others, it forms through invisibility. A child who discovers that being useful is the only time they are truly noticed. That care is something they earn, not something they receive. And so the role takes root. Not through force, but through subtle reinforcement. Each moment of praise, each instance of being the strong one, each time they are told, directly or indirectly, that their feelings can wait. By adolescence, the pattern becomes instinct. They apologize before they sit hurt. They help before they sit or asked. They hold themselves together, even when no one is watching. This is the origin of over-responsibility. A quiet agreement written in childhood, a belief that love is maintained through effort, a fear that letting go will cause the ground to shift beneath everyone's feet. These beginnings are not failures. They are adaptations, beautiful in intention but heavy in cost. And though the world may see only the strength produced by these early lessons, the person living inside them feels the unspoken truth. Strength learned too early often becomes a burden carried too long. There is a particular psychology behind becoming the one who always holds things together. Not a flaw, not a weakness, but a pattern, deep, intricate, and often invisible to the person living inside it. Psychologists sometimes call it overfunctioning, the tendency to take on more emotional, mental, or practical responsibility than what is naturally yours. It happens slowly, shaped by past environments where being dependable was safer than being honest, more welcomed than being vulnerable. At the heart of this pattern is something quietly human, the need to belong without causing disturbance. Many who become over-responsible have nervous systems tuned to the smallest emotional shifts around them. Their bodies learn to detect disappointment, frustration, or fear the way others detect changes in temperature. When someone else feels uneasy, the dependable person feels it in their own chest, and instinctively, they move to make things right. This response can mirror the fawn instinct, a survival pattern where maintaining harmony feels essential, not out of fear of danger, but out of fear of losing connection. So they smooth edges, solve problems, absorb tension, and make themselves easy to rely on. The brain rewards this behavior with momentary relief, a sense of order restored. But over time, this becomes a loop. Help relief, expectation, help again. Emotional labor becomes automatic. The reliable person begins to anticipate needs before they are voiced. They take on tasks simply because they know no one else will. They silence their own discomfort, not out of bravery, but because prioritizing themselves feels unnatural, even selfish. Another psychological layer appears: self-silencing. A quiet belief that their emotions are too heavy, too inconvenient, too unimportant compared to the struggles of others. So they tuck their needs into unused corners of their mind, promising themselves they will return to them later, a promise rarely kept. In relationships, this pattern becomes deeply reinforced. People praise their steadiness. People trust their competence. People lean on them without noticing that the leaning never stops. And so a paradox forms: the more capable they are, the less care they receive. Not because people are unkind, but because strength, when shown consistently, becomes mistaken for an endless resource. There comes a point when the dependable person begins to feel two lives unfolding within them. One life is the outer version the world admires, steady, composed, effortlessly responsible. The other is the inner world that few ever see, a place where exhaustion gathers like dust in unused corners, where emotions sit unspoken, waiting for a moment that never seems to arrive. This is the quiet war inside. A part of them wants to keep helping, because helping feels familiar, almost like breathing. There's comfort in predictability. There's safety in knowing exactly who they are to others. And there's a deep, sincere tenderness in wanting to ease the weight around them. But there is another part, a softer, more fragile part, that longs to rest. To not be needed for once. To exist without the constant pressure of someone else's expectations. To be human instead of dependable. These two parts rarely agree. When the desire for rest arises, guilt follows closely behind. The thought of stepping back feels like abandoning someone, saying, "I can't," feels like failing at the one role they've always fulfilled. Even imagining their own needs can feel uncomfortable, as if they are intruding on a space reserved for others. And so they push through. They answer one more call, take on one more task, swallow one more feeling that might make someone else uneasy. Over time, resentment begins to grow, but quietly, carefully, almost apologetically. Not toward others, but toward themselves. Toward the version of themselves that never learned how to say enough. Toward a life that feels built on unspoken obligations. Toward the exhaustion that settles deeper each time they pretend they're fine. Yet, even in resentment, the dependable one stays silent. Because silence has always felt easier than disappointment. Because asking for help feels foreign, almost unsafe. And beneath all of this lies a deeper loneliness, the kind that forms when people rely on someone without ever truly seeing them. The dependable person becomes a presence, a function, a role, rarely a human who also needs holding. This inner conflict is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is simply a slow, steady ache. The ache of being the strong one in a world that forgets strong people are still breakable. There is always a moment, quiet, unexpected, almost imperceptible, when the dependable person feels the first real fracture. It doesn't arrive with drama. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in the way dusk slips into a room, gradually, then all at once. Sometimes it is triggered by something small, a message they don't have the energy to answer, a request that feels heavier than usual, a sudden realization that they've been running on an empty tank for far too long. Other times, it comes from something larger, an illness, a crisis, a loss, something that strips away the illusion of endless capacity. In that moment, their strength no longer feels like a gift. It feels like a cage built from years of "I sit them fine." What breaks is not their ability. What breaks is the belief that they must always endure. The dependable person usually tries to hide this moment. They push through, hoping the crack will seal itself with time. They tell themselves it's just a rough week, just fatigue, just a phase. But the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And the exhaustion they've ignored begins to seep into everything: sleep, motivation, patience, even the softness in their voice. Then comes the emotional slip, the day they can pretend anymore. Maybe they cry in a place where tears have never been allowed. Maybe they speak a truth they've swallowed for years. Maybe they finally admit, if only to themselves, that they are tired, deeply tired. This moment can feel terrifying. Not because of weakness, but because it threatens the image they have spent their entire life maintaining. They fear that letting the mask fall will disappoint others, or that the world will crumble if they stop holding it together. But instead, something else happens. The world does not fall apart. It simply shifts, gently, insistently, revealing what has always been true. No human being is meant to be the anchor for every storm. No one is built to be strong without rest. And even the most dependable heart needs a place to lean. This moment of cracking is not the end of strength. It is the beginning of becoming real. Healing for the dependable person never arrives in a single revelation. It comes slowly, quietly, more like a sunrise than a lightning strike. Not a sudden change, but a gradual remembering of what it feels like to exist beyond usefulness. The first shift is usually internal. A small thought that feels unfamiliar at first. Maybe I'll be allowed to rest. Not a declaration, not a decision. Just a gentle curiosity that begins to soften the walls they've lived behind for so long. From there, the return to self unfolds in subtle ways. They begin noticing their own exhaustion. Instead of pushing past it, they start saying maybe later to small demands, even if it feels uncomfortable. They catch themselves wanting things, simple things like quiet afternoons, slower mornings, or moments without responsibility clinging to them like a shadow. There is no dramatic rebellion here, no sudden refusal, just small steps towards space, each one carrying a quiet courage. And with these steps comes another unfamiliar experience: being cared for. At first, receiving help feels unnatural, almost disorienting. The dependable one is used to being the giver, the listener, the steady foundation. Allowing someone else to hold even a fraction of their weight can feel like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. But slowly they begin to see that letting others in does not make them weak. It makes them human. They learn that boundaries are not walls but gentle edges, places where their needs and others' needs can coexist without collapsing into each other. They learn that solitude is not abandonment. They learn that they don't have to explain every no. And they learn that the world continues to move even when they pause. Bit by bit, they rediscover the parts of themselves that were lost under years of responsibility. Joy that isn't tied to accomplishment. Rest that isn't earned. Softness that doesn't need justification. The slow return to self is not a journey of becoming someone new. It is a homecoming. A recognition that beneath the layers of strength, there is a person who was always worthy, not because they carried others, but because they existed at all. In the end, the story of the dependable one is not a tragedy. It is a portrait, soft, complex, quietly human, of someone who spent years holding the world together and finally learned that they didn't have to. Strength, as it turns out, was never the problem. The world needs strong people. It needs steady hearts, gentle listeners, and those who can remain calm when everything else trembles. But strength without rest is not strength. It is survival. And no human being is meant to survive their entire life. The real beauty emerges when the dependable person begins to live from a place of truth rather than expectation. When they discover that their worth is not in how much they hold, but in how deeply they feel. When they learn that vulnerability is not a crack in the armor, but the door through which genuine connection enters. Some days they may still slip into old patterns. They may still say yes a little too quickly, still carry weight that isn't theirs, still silence a need that deserve to be spoken. But slowly, gently, the world around them begins to shift. Not because others change, but because they do. They begin to choose themselves in small ways. A quiet evening instead of another obligation. Asking for help without rehearsing the request. Allowing their own sadness to be held, not hidden. Letting someone else be strong for a moment. And in these simple, tender acts, the dependable one learns a new kind of strength. One rooted not in endurance but in balance. One shaped not by obligation, but by authenticity. In the quiet of this new life, something soft begins to grow. A sense of inner spaciousness. A recognition that being seen is not a burden. A faith that the people who truly care will stay, even when the mask is gone. The dependable one still loves deeply, still carries compassion, still brings steadiness where it's needed, but now they include themselves in that circle of care. And for the first time, they feel what it means to be held. A strength shared. A balanced life. A heart finally allowed to simply be human.